mist clings to the ancient stone spires of Edinburgh like a suffocating shroud, while the wind howls through the narrow closes of the Royal Mile. Beneath the feet of unsuspecting tourists walking the historic streets lies a forgotten world of darkness and despair. This is not merely a story of old architecture or forgotten cellars, but a journey into a literal underworld where the poor lived and died in squalor. The Edinburgh Vaults act as a time capsule of misery, sealed away for nearly 2 centuries. The damp stone walls absorbed the screams of the dying and the whispers of criminals who sought refuge in the pitch blackness. Something malevolent waits in those shadows, watching the living with jealous eyes. History tells us that the city of Edinburgh in the late 18th century was a place of stark contrast and overcrowding. The rich lived in high tenements, while the poor were crammed into filth-ridden basements. To solve the expansion problem, the city planners commissioned the South Bridge to connect the old town with the University District. Completed in the year 1788, the bridge was an architectural marvel consisting of 19 arches. However, only one arch is visible today, spanning the Cowgate, while the other 18 are hidden behind towering buildings and streets. Within these concealed arches, the chambers known as the vaults were constructed. They were never intended to house human beings, yet they became a tomb for thousands. The bridge itself was cursed from the very beginning, according to local superstition and folklore. The city officials chose the wife of a well-known judge to be the first person to cross the South Bridge to demonstrate its safety. However, the woman passed away shortly before the grand opening ceremony took place. Not wanting to delay the proceedings, the officials decided to transport her body across the bridge in a hearse. The locals watched in horror as a coffin became the first passenger to traverse the new structure. They believed the bridge was cursed by death before the mortar had even dried. This ominous start foreshadowed the grim destiny that awaited the chambers beneath the surface, where darkness would soon fester. In the early years, the vaults served a legitimate purpose for merchants and cobblers who set up workshops in the cavernous spaces. Wine merchants stored their casks in the cool darkness, and tradesmen worked by candlelight. But the engineering of the South Bridge was flawed, and the vaults were not waterproof. Rainwater seeped through the porous limestone, carrying waste and filth from the streets above down into the caverns. The damp conditions caused rot and decay, forcing the legitimate businesses to abandon the vaults within a few years. As the respectable citizens fled, a different demographic moved in to claim the dripping stone chambers. The vaults became a haven for the destitute and the criminal element. By the early 19th century, the vaults had transformed into a sprawling slum, hidden from the polite society of Edinburgh. Irish immigrants fleeing the potato famine, and the local poor who could not afford housing sought shelter in the arches. Entire families lived in single rooms with no ventilation or sunlight. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and raw sewage. Disease ran rampant through the population, causing cholera and typhus to claim countless lives. In this complete darkness, children grew up with rickets and deformities, having never seen the light of day. The vaults became a city of night, where survival was the only law and morality was a luxury no one could afford. Within this subterranean labyrinth, illegal activities flourished away from the prying eyes of the city guard. Unlicensed whiskey distilleries pumped out strong liquor, while gambling dens operated around the clock. Yet there were darker crimes committed in the shadows of the South Bridge Vaults. Rumors circulated of body snatchers who frequented the area looking for fresh corpses to sell to the medical schools. The infamous William Burke and William Hare were known to roam the district, preying on the vulnerable. The vaults provided the perfect hunting ground where a person could disappear without a trace. No one would miss a beggar or a drunkard who vanished into the black abyss of the stone corridors. Imagine the life of a man named Thomas, who lived in the vaults during the winter of 1825. Thomas was a former soldier left broken and penniless after the wars. He occupied a small corner of a vault shared with 10 other souls huddled together for warmth. Every day was a battle against the damp cold that seeped into his bones. The only light came from sputtering tallow candles that cast long dancing shadows against the wet walls. Thomas learned to navigate the maze by touch and sound. He knew the heavy footsteps of the watchmen and the scurrying claws of the rats that grew to the size of cats. But Thomas also heard things that could not be explained. Thomas began to sense that the darkness was not empty, even when he was alone in the corridors. He felt a heavy gaze fixed upon him whenever he walked near the rear chambers where the light did not reach. Other residents whispered of the Watcher, a shadow that stood taller than any man and breathed cold air down their necks. They said the Watcher was not a ghost of the dead, but something ancient that fed on the misery of the place. Thomas tried to dismiss these tales as the ramblings of feverish minds. However, the feeling of dread grew stronger with each passing night. He started sleeping with a sharpened stone in his hand, fearing an attack from both the living and the dead. One particularly frigid night, Thomas woke to the sound of dragging footsteps echoing down the stone passageway outside his room. The heavy scrape of boots on the dirt floor was accompanied by a wet, sliding sound. Thomas sat up and strained his ears to listen, while his heart hammered against his ribs. The other residents were asleep, exhausted from their daily struggle. Curiosity and fear compelled Thomas to crawl to the doorway and peek into the corridor. The faint glow of a dying fire down the hall illuminated two figures struggling with a heavy sack. The sack moved slightly as if something inside was still fighting for life. Thomas recognized the men immediately as associates of the local resurrectionists who supplied bodies to Dr. Robert Knox. They were not carrying a corpse dug from a grave, but a fresh victim taken from the streets, or perhaps from within the vaults themselves. The realization made Thomas freeze in terror as he watched them drag their prize toward the exit. He knew that if they saw him, he would be the next item on their inventory. He pressed himself flat against the cold, wet stone, praying to remain invisible. The men stopped just a few feet away from his hiding spot to adjust their grip on the burlap sack. A low moan escaped the bag, confirming his worst fears. As the men argued in hushed tones about the payment, a shift in the atmosphere occurred. The temperature in the corridor plummeted instantly, causing their breath to mist in the air. The candle lanterns set on the ground flickered violently before dying out, completely plunging them into absolute darkness. Thomas heard the men curse and fumble for a light. In that pitch-black silence, a sound emerged that did not belong to the living. It was a guttural growl that vibrated through the floor and into the bones of the men. The resurrectionists fell silent, their greed replaced by primal fear. Something was standing directly behind them in the narrow tunnel. Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, but the image of what he sensed was burned into his mind. He heard the sound of heavy leather boots crushing the gravel slowly and deliberately. This was the entity the locals called Mr. Boots, a vile spirit said to control the vaults. The resurrectionists screamed as they were thrown violently against the stone walls by an unseen force. The heavy sack dropped to the ground with a thud. Thomas heard bones snapping and the tearing of fabric, but he dared not make a sound. The assault was brutal and swift, leaving the two criminals groaning in agony on the floor. Then the heavy footsteps turned toward where Thomas was hiding. The presence stopped right in front of the alcove where Thomas lay trembling. He could feel a cold radiation emanating from the dark space before him. It was a malice so pure it felt like a physical weight pressing on his chest. A voice that sounded like grinding stones whispered a warning that chilled his blood. The entity commanded him to leave this place and never return. It claimed the darkness as its own domain. Thomas scrambled backward on his hands and knees, heedless of the noise he made. He abandoned his meager possessions and ran blindly toward the faint gray light of the exit archway. Thomas escaped the vaults that night and fled Edinburgh, entirely eventually finding work in the shipyards of Glasgow. He never spoke of what he saw until he was on his deathbed years later, but the vaults continued to consume lives long after he left. The conditions became so deplorable that the city finally intervened in the late 19th century. The residents were evicted, and the vaults were filled with tons of rubble to prevent anyone from returning. The entrances were bricked up, and the underworld was erased from the maps. For decades, the citizens of Edinburgh walked over the South Bridge, unaware of the history buried beneath their shoes. The vaults remained sealed and forgotten for over 100 years, preserving the energy and the artifacts within. It was not until the 1980s that a former rugby player named Nori Rowan discovered a tunnel leading into the lost chambers. He began an excavation process to clear the rubble and reveal the Georgian architecture hidden below. As the workers removed the debris, they found toys, medicine bottles, and clay pipes left exactly where they had been dropped a century prior. It was a ghost town, frozen in time. But as the physical space was cleared, the supernatural forces that had been dormant were awakened once more. During the excavation, the workers reported strange phenomena that defied logical explanation. Tools would vanish and reappear in different rooms. Heavy stones were thrown across the cavern by invisible hands. Several strong men refused to work in certain areas, claiming they felt an overwhelming sense of despair or were physically pushed. The atmosphere in the vaults was heavy and oppressive. It became clear that the sealing of the vaults had not banished the entities, but merely trapped them. The most active area was discovered to be a double-height vault with a strange acoustic property. This chamber would become the center of modern paranormal investigations. One of the most disturbing discoveries was a room that contained a stone circle. It was later revealed that a Wiccan coven had used the vaults for rituals shortly after their rediscovery. However, the coven stopped using the space after experiencing terrifying encounters. They claimed that their protective circle was broken by a malevolent spirit that they could not control. The entity was described as a misogynistic presence that targeted women, leaving scratches and bruises on their skin. This aligned with the historical legends of the Watcher or Mr. Boots. The darkness in the vaults was ancient, and it did not welcome those who tried to tamper with it. Today, the Edinburgh Vaults are open to the public for guided tour, but the warnings remain serious. Visitors frequently report experiencing the same phenomena that Thomas and the excavators encountered. People often feel sudden drops in temperature or the sensation of someone breathing on their neck. The most common physical attack is a burning, scratching sensation, usually on the back or arms. When the victim checks the area later, they find 3 red welts resembling claw marks. These attacks happen most often near the room where the stone circle remains. The entity seems to feed on the fear and the energy of the crowds. The spirit known as Mr. Boots is the most infamous resident of the South Bridge Vaults. He is described as a tall man wearing high leather boots and a dirty blue coat. Witnesses say he has a face that is either missing or heavily scarred. He patrols the back section of the vaults, guarding his territory aggressively. Psychics who have visited the location claim he was a watchman or a criminal enforcer in life who murdered women and children. His energy is dominating and angry. He is known to shout at visitors to get out, and has been known to push people who show disrespect to the space. In contrast to the darkness of Mr. Boots, there is a pitiful spirit known as Jack. Jack is believed to be the ghost of a young boy who lived and died in the vaults during the slum era. Visitors often feel a small cold hand grabbing their own, or a tugging on their coattails. Some bring toys and marbles to leave for him in one of the chambers. While Jack seems harmless, his presence is a heartbreaking reminder of the children who suffered in the damp darkness. His laughter has been recorded on electronic voice phenomena devices echoing through the empty stone halls. The phenomenon of the Edinburgh Vaults has attracted paranormal investigators from all over the world. Scientific teams have set up equipment to monitor the environment, searching for evidence of the afterlife. They have captured unexplained fluctuations in electromagnetic fields and thermal anomalies that move intelligently. In one famous experiment, a thermal camera captured a heat signature shaped like a human figure walking through a solid stone wall. The skeptics try to explain the experiences as infrasound caused by traffic from the bridge above. But infrasound cannot explain the physical scratches or the specific voices captured on tape. Another recurring figure is the cobbler, a spirit often seen in the area that was once a shoe-making workshop. Unlike the malevolent watcher, the cobbler appears to be a residual haunting. He is seen hunched over a workbench, repeating the same motions of his trade, oblivious to the living people around him. He represents the tragic reality of the working poor who toiled in these dungeons. His presence adds a layer of sorrow to the horror. It suggests that some souls are trapped here not by evil, but by the sheer weight of their monotonous and difficult lives. The psychological impact of entering the vaults cannot be overstated. Upon descending the stone staircase, the air changes immediately. It becomes thick and still carrying a metallic scent of damp earth and rust. The silence is profound, only broken by the distant rumble of cars overhead, which sounds like thunder. Many visitors suffer from panic attacks or fainting spells within minutes of entering. The sensory deprivation, combined with the claustrophobic setting, triggers a primal flight response. It is a place that human biology instinctively recognizes as unsafe. Even with modern electric lighting installed in some areas, the shadows in the vaults seem to have a life of their own. The lights often flicker or fail completely without electrical cause. Flashlights drained of fresh batteries in seconds are a common occurrence. Tour guides tell stories of seeing shadows detach themselves from the walls and move independently. These shadow people are often seen darting into the periphery of vision, vanishing when looked at directly. They seem to be observing the intruders, waiting for a moment of vulnerability. The city of Edinburgh has tried to sanitize its history and present the vaults as a tourist attraction. Yet the grim reality of what happened there cannot be washed away. The suffering of the thousands who lived in filth and died of disease has imprinted a permanent scar on the location. It is a place where the veil between the worlds is incredibly thin. The stone walls act as a battery, storing the emotional intensity of 2 centuries of trauma. Every person who enters adds their own fear to the collection, fueling the entities that reside there. There is a specific warning given to those who wish to investigate the vaults alone. Do not provoke the spirits, and do not invite them to communicate. Those who have mocked the entities often regret it immediately. There are reports of people being followed home after leaving the vaults. They experience poltergeist activity in their own houses or suffer from nightmares for weeks. The attachment seems to linger like a contagion. It suggests that the entities in the vaults are not bound to the location, but can latch onto the energy of a living host. One of the most terrifying accounts involves a radio host who spent the night in the vaults for a charity event. He claimed to hear a choir of voices singing from a room that was empty. As the night went on, the singing turned into screaming. He was found the next morning in a state of catatonic shock, unable to speak for hours. When he finally recovered, he refused to ever discuss the details of what happened in the final hours of his vigil. He simply warned others that some doors should never be opened. Electronic voice phenomena recordings taken in the vaults have produced chilling results. Voices speaking in archaic Scots dialect have been captured asking for help or telling people to leave. One clear recording captured a man saying the name of the investigator who was present. The intelligence behind these responses rules out random interference. It implies that the spirits are conscious and aware of the current time and the people visiting them. They are not just recordings of the past, but active participants in the present. The contrast between the vibrant city of Edinburgh above and the dead city below is striking. Above ground, there are festivals, music, and life. Below ground, there is only silence, darkness, and death. The South Bridge represents the duality of human nature. We build beautiful structures to mask the ugly truth underneath. The vaults are the subconscious of the city, holding all the repressed memories and dark secrets that society tries to ignore. But as long as the vaults remain, the past will never truly be buried. As you walk the Royal Mile tonight and admire the historic beauty, take a moment to look down at the cobblestones. Remember that just a few feet beneath you lies a labyrinth of despair. The spirits of the shoemakers, the beggars, and the victims of the body snatchers are still there in the cold dark. They are waiting in the silence of the Edinburgh Vaults, and if you listen closely enough over the sound of the wind, you might just hear the heavy footsteps of Mr. Boots coming to claim his next victim.